Hi, welcome to another episode of Being Spiritual at RU with Chaplain Scott, and I'm Matt. Glad to be here. We had a lot of interest, our most viewed episode last week when we talked about race, and which is not surprising. And I feel like, depending on how I title this online, this one probably could get as much traction. But the just want to reflect today on the inauguration. As of this recording, it happened 2 days ago on
Yep,
Monday,
the 20th. Yep.
um, and so yeah, a lot's changed. I mean, it changed quickly. I mean, that's one thing you could say about Donald Trump is he does things very quickly. He doesn't waste a lot of time,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so um, a lot has changed in our society and our culture already in just 2 short days of him being in office.
Yep.
So some of the bigger things, that we anticipated. One was the gender identity stuff. He declared in his inauguration speech that the U.S. government is going to stand behind. There's only two genders,
Right.
which is fascinating. We get into that. Obviously, a lot of immigration stuff.
Yep.
He signed. And another thing, I mean, we were talking before we started recording. We may not have time for this, but uh, he the January 6th stuff, releasing all those prisoners, but he wants to take over TikTok,
Right.
which is fascinating. And he had all those billionaire leaders of all our communication stuff sitting behind him at the inauguration, which is kind of scary, of him wanting to take over all of our social media, and influence that,
Yep.
which is a fascinating development that he didn't really campaign on any of that. So lots to cover. I don't know if we get to it all, but I think some of the probably the more pressing issues that maybe some of our students might be worried about is gender identity stuff and immigration.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, the gender thing. It's like I don't want to call I don't want to call Trumpers like stupid, but science like legitimately shows us that there isn't just binary genders, and it's like almost like ignoring scientific evidence to make that statement. um, and that's like throwing out all the social stuff of like uh, people maybe who are born with one clear gender identity and feel in their soul they were created for another gender. And that's not even talking about that. That's just talking
Right.
about physically when people are born biologically that there's a gender ambiguity.
Yep.
So uh, so that was fascinating to me that he said that at his inauguration speech too, which actually signals how important it is to where he wants to head.
Right. And a lot of this, honestly don't know that we actually know what he believes as a human being
Well,
in
that's
his
true. Yeah.
soul. I think it's all sort of, as I say, red meat for people who support him, who want to go back to some fairyland they think existed. That's kind of a curious term, fairyland, but a, um, a time when everything was so much easier and so much more Christian, of course, and so much more black and white. Here comes race again, but
Yeah.
where I know that a lot of people were complaining that we're confused about people claiming, to be trans or being non-binary, and which some were confused, some were angry, and there were definitely people who just resisted that any kind of suggestion of, having to state your pronouns or having to, be respectful and not dead name or treat someone who says they're trans, treat them as if you didn't hear them or you didn't believe them. Um, And I know that a lot of those people feel very empowered right now. And I'm expecting pushback against the use of pronouns, against being respectful, basically. Um, and, I fear for in some parts of the country for anybody who identifies as trans or non-binary or is in any way doesn't meet that binary understanding of gender, because sex is one thing, gender is another. And so when they talk about the way men are supposed to act or women are supposed to act, masculine, feminine, as if there hasn't always been a range of that. There's always been not a binary, but in some people's minds there is this ideal man, ideal woman, and some of them claim they get it from scripture, of course.
But even that, Jesus, talks about the intersex in Matthew 19, and how he even acknowledges that some are born that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like a lot of, like when I bring that up, it's funny because I'll bring up Matthew 19 in this discussion, and most Christians I bring it up with have never read it before, or they read it but never thought of it in a gender sort of way.
Right.
And so they're reading it that way for the first time, and they try to explain it away.
Of course.
And
Yep.
it's like, well, no, Jesus literally acknowledges a third gender right here in the text.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're born that way. That a lot of people try to explain it. Well, they choose that for religious purposes. Well,
Right.
not the way Jesus talked about it. And it's so I think it's Christian, historical Christian to male and female, but
Mm-hmm.
in reality, scripturally, it's not. And I think we have to come to terms with that as Christians in the whole gender discussion. But I think you're right. I think people are gonna. I get criticized all the time because I have pronouns in my bio
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. And I think we're just gonna see more of that bigotry and
Yep.
hate.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you know, uh,
I It'll be interesting to see what happens at Pride celebrations this coming summer. And unfortunately, it is not 100%, but in many ways determined by where you live. Because I don't expect a lot of pushback in New Jersey or New York or the blue or purple or states, whatever. But there's definitely some parts of the country where, again, people may feel empowered to make America great again by stopping things like gay pride celebrations, or
yeah.
again forcing people back into a binary understanding of gender and sexuality. So um yeah, I don't know, it's definitely chilling. um Appropriate that we're in single digit temperatures at night right now, so it's very
Yeah.
cold out there. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a concern. It's a deep concern.
It was interesting that right after he said that and some other things, he said he wanted his legacy to be a peacemaker and a unifier.
Right.
And it's like you started the whole conversation by being disunifying, right?
Right. And
It's like
sometimes I wonder, does he listen to what he's saying? Because what he just said contradicts what he said. And
yeah.
again, I think it's for the applause line. It's like sound bites.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
when is he,
unifying for MAGA, right?
right? I was going to say, when has he
So
ever attempted or cared about unifying the country, except for his base and
yeah.
basically giving them power, releasing them from prison. I guess in
Well,
that way, he's just like Jesus, right? He sets the captives free, I guess. So
yeah.
he can claim that.
Yeah.
But
He he doesn't see the rest of us as Americans.
right, or as real Americans, right? Right.
Yeah, like in the entire MAGA base feels that way, right?
Right.
I had somebody come up to me at my gym the other day, and they just assumed I was a Trump supporter, and they asked me straight up, "Do you like you support Trump, right?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not." That's how I responded, and they were like, they started talking, well, why, and I was starting to explain it, and we have a good discussion. I mean, he was a friend of mine, so Um, it wasn't volatile or anything. It was healthy. But then he's like, I just always assumed you were a Trump supporter because, you have you fly a flag at your house and you wear Carhartt like sweatshirts and things like that. And I'm like, because I wear Americana and I'm like American, right?
Right.
That you just assume that I'm a Trump supporter. Like that hit me that like they actually don't think those of us that don't support Trump are real Americans. I think
Right.
that's like, and then you saw it yesterday after one of your bishops from your wonderful denomination had her homily to Trump. You had senators saying she should be deported, right?
Right.
Like she's not a real American. Like get her out of here. Like what?
That that's when it starts getting scary too, because it
Yeah.
starts to resemble certain countries in the past who, when they had a dictator, felt like they needed to purge those who aren't loyal. They needed to get rid of those who don't support the cause, and to start vilifying groups ethnically and otherwise. And yeah, that's where it starts to get pretty scary to think, how far is this just rhetoric, or what kind of, I don't know if Bishop Buddy has um, security, but she might need it,
Mm-hmm.
because who knows? I mean, what people may do or try, or um, I can only imagine the kind of hate mail or comments they're getting. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I don't. I know sometimes I have to take a step back and acknowledge the fact that what's going on is much larger than I am, and try my best to be present for those who I see in person, and to say, how can I be there for them,
Mm.
and not overreact, not despair, but in some ways make sure that those who I believe God has called me to serve on this campus, I have to make sure they're okay first. And I can't change the minds of Trump supporters, and I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, am I not an American too? Are we not Americans, regardless of what we believe? Uh,
Yeah.
and by executive order, right, he got rid of birthright citizenship.
Yeah. That's the other big thing is the immigration stuff. Um,
Yeah.
it's that whole it's the 14th Amendment. Like it's it's an amendment. It's our
They're going to have,
Constitution,
yeah,
and it's like he's defying it with an executive order.
he's trying. Right.
Yeah, and it's a very racist
Oh,
executive order, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that whole 14th Amendment was started so that slavery, when they were emancipated, they could become citizens.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
why it was put in the Constitution. So
Yep.
it was birthed out of dealing with systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
and now he wants to take a step back to that, and people are happy. And I see all over the internet, celebrating Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson,
Right.
Confederate generals again.
Right.
Like it's like we want to go back to that, which is
Yeah.
scary. And in the new slave, and these babies that would be born would be without a home
Mm-hmm.
legally,
Right.
because they wouldn't be a citizen of their parents' home country because they
Yeah.
were born
They're
here,
born here. Yeah.
and they wouldn't be a citizen under his rule. So they would almost become slaves.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wants to do. Very, very, very racist. And
Mm-hmm.
I loved the bishop yesterday because those are the two things we heard. I think, at least for myself as a chaplain at Rutgers, I've heard a lot is the gender and sexuality stuff, and then the immigration issues that people are, like, as she said so eloquently, are scared or afraid. Or I've heard a lot of that pastorally over the last couple months. And I'm sure that we're going to hear more and more as the semester goes. and so I'm grateful that she spoke out that way. Because if I had to say anything to Trump, it would have been along those lines. So for
Right.
me, it resonated very well. And so,
I, I,
yeah, go ahead.
I applaud her restraint because I
Yeah.
could have said a lot more.
Well, I noticed she was very meticulously reading what she wrote, so she didn't go off
Exactly.
script.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Stay on script. Stay on script. So yeah.
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 Uh, but I thought, as chaplains, like what kind of, I guess, pastorally advice and input can we give for those who are struggling with those two big issues that are changing rapidly? I mean, even like churches now are no longer safe places for people. I mean, you see that he announced like churches and schools are not safe for illegal immigrants, which is
Right.
scary. Like, where do they go?
Right. I'm not sure he can do that by fiat. I mean, he's certainly going to try, but where this is going to become a real problem, and this is kind of what I think some people were hoping for, is that it may come down to states versus the federal government. Whereas in New Jersey, there have already been statements by elected officials and others basically rejecting what he's claiming to do.
Yeah,
Um, and that's going to be a question that I don't know how it's going to be resolved because, if the Supreme Court is clearly on his side, but say the state of New Jersey decides that congregations, churches are still sanctuaries, and the Catholic Church may have something to say about that too. I don't know. They certainly haven't weighed in.
yeah,
Um, what what's going to happen? In terms of will New Jersey and other states decide we're going to resist federal
yeah.
troops, and federal.
I mean, Phil has definitely um, signaled that he would, fight that stuff,
Yep.
and other governors in blue states have as well.
Yep.
Um, Especially the Washington state, their AG and governor, they're very proactive.
Yep.
Um, I did appreciate it was encouraging that the ACLU and governors filed a joint lawsuit as soon as Trump. They were like ready for it, as
Yeah.
soon as Trump wrote that
Yep.
executive order
Right.
on the 14th Amendment. So there is some hope, you know.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it means a lot of work.
yeah, a lot of work, a lot of money. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess some of it is like see where we can support and help. I'm trying to explore those avenues.
Mm.
Like, how can I help? Because there is going to be a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And, you know, clearly, he wants to shut down DEI and any kind of education that doesn't match their vision of American history. So universities have already been a target and are going to continue to be a target. So we may see this playing out at the university level. People just saying, people basically coming in and saying you can no longer teach blank
Yeah.
um, because the president said so. Which, again, does he really have that authority? Um, I guess we'll find out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Private universities may be exempt to some extent, but federal ones, a public university, if we get federal funds, he can always, hold those back. So, yeah, I just think we're in uncharted territory in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah.
but
I mean, he wants to get rid of the Department of Education too. So,
right. Well,
um,
that's part of the slashing the government, the waste in the government, which means, but it's ironic because if he doesn't want a centralized, Department of Education, why is he mandating things as almost a dictator instead of kicking it back to the states to decide?
yeah,
And the states decide that. Um, so, yeah, unfortunately, we don't know what's posturing and what's rhetoric and what is actually going to be played out in the courts
Yeah.
and
Well,
by authorities, whether they're uniformed or not. And yeah, we don't know.
well, I think it's important that you hit it right. Like watch what he does. I mean, he'll say a lot of things right to rile people up. We get new, head fakes. He loves to like say something over here. Like I'm renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf America. It was a complete head fake. Like
Right.
complete
Totally. Yeah.
get
Distraction.
your mind off of what he's really going to do. So
Right.
you have to watch what he's really going to
Yep.
do,
Yep.
and then react. And so I think a pastoral thing would be don't get so worked up over everything he says. Maybe to turn it off.
Oh, absolutely. Don't listen
Watch.
to
Yeah, watch what actually happens,
Well,
and then
it's
respond.
it's a bit like the TikTok thing. In his speech, he says, TikTok's back, and everybody cheers. He was the one trying to get
I
TikTok
know. Yeah,
banned.
yeah,
This is what's called gaslighting.
yeah,
He is hoping you won't remember the fact that he was the one trying to get rid of it. Now he claims he's going to take it over, which is definitely a dictatorish move
yeah.
to make it his. But the fact that nobody called him on that, none of his people, if they did, they didn't say anything, to say, wait a second, you are the one who wanted to get rid of it. But
Yeah,
now
and
he's claiming he rescued it
yeah,
and he wants to be in charge of it. So that's why you cannot listen to what he says. I saw another meme. It said, America basically just reunited with an abusive ex-spouse, and
yeah.
like a lot of abusive spouses do, they mess with the heads of the people that they're abusing, and they basically are authoritarian. And that's what I foresee happening. And people believe him. They believe everything he says.
Mm.
And I think for a student, unplugging from news and social media when you need to, and choosing social media carefully. We talked earlier about Facebook's move that really angered a lot of people, including me. That this is just the beginning, I think, of watching encroaching creep of the creeps, that
Yeah.
are going to try to use social media for their own ends.
Did you
Which,
see they said it was a glitch?
right, which, all right,
you glitched us all following Trump.
right, that was a
Yeah.
glitch. Yeah, no, it's again, that's like gaslighting too, to say,
Yeah.
well, that wasn't real. Why are you so upset? They claim, well, you were following President Biden, therefore you must be following President Trump. They didn't do that 4 years ago. That didn't happen 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So
No.
no, it's
They were fighting it, Trump. I mean,
yeah,
Facebook was fighting Trump.
yeah. So it was all about, and he got banned from X, and now he's all
Yeah.
over X.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's reality versus fiction,
Hmm.
and I think strengthening relationships with people in person, getting to know each other, listening to each other, um, and being in that kind of trusting relationship that people could bring any question they have, bring their fears, bring their hopes, even. Um, that's something that I think needs to take the front place for most of us, to say we need to strengthen the real relationships we have in person, and not get caught up in the fake news. There you go.
Yeah.
It's fake news of the Trump administration, which is back, and it's going to get worse. And I think we just have to be mindful of um, what counts and what affects people's lives. At least the people we deal with and live with the most. We need to strengthen those people and strengthen those relationships. So instead of just getting always baited to react. And it's easy to be reactive, and I can be very reactive. But yeah, I think we're going to continue to see gaslighting, and we're going to continue to see basically the abusive, partner moves, and fear, creating, if you don't have me, you're not, well, I mean, again, you're not really, you're going to be homeless if you don't, agree to these policies, basically telling babies that they're homeless because they're not a citizen here and they're not a citizen back home. So where do they go? Like you said, it's an interesting tactic that's hasn't played itself out yet, but it's pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, that's a good closing word. And if you ever want to talk, anybody out there, feel free to reach out, comment, like, subscribe, and email, call, show up to the Canterbury House.
Yep.
All that.
We'll probably talk a bit about what we're going to be doing this semester. Hopefully soon we'll talk about like schedule, what we want to do, and ways you can interact with us in person. So
yeah, great. Thanks for watching.
Yep. Bye-bye.